Hey guys, what's up and welcome to the channel. My name's Alex. Today we're going to be talking about 4 common money and investing myths that could be harming your financial future. Now let's get into the video. So the 4 common money and investing myths that I wanted to break down today are: number 1, your home is an investment; number 2, you have time to invest later; number 3, buying is always better than renting; and finally number 4, I can't afford to save. These are things that I think I've heard from countless people, friends, relatives, everyone around that I've talked to about anything to do with money. I see these things talked about on the internet a lot, and I just have to say that these things can't be blanket rules. That's why they have to be myths. Circumstantially, some of them may work for certain people in certain certain life circumstances or certain opportunities they may have available, but it can't be followed as a blanket rule. So that's why I wanted to talk about these today. So let's talk about number 1 first then. Your home is an investment. This is something that I hear talked about a lot. If you've read some of the books such as Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, you'd probably be aware by now that your home is actually more of a liability than it is an asset. Statistically, in a lot of countries such as where I live in Australia, it is true that over a certain span of time, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, buying a piece of real estate, regardless of if it's an investment or if it's a home, it will probably appreciate in value. But the reason I wouldn't class a primary place of residence per se as an investment specifically is because there's a couple of things that don't quite line up with what a true investment should be, and that's what I'll break down now. So the first problem with that is cash flow. A good investment should either put money in your pocket quite regularly, such as if you own stocks, they'll be paying you a dividend every couple of months or weeks. If you own an investment property, you'll be receiving rent checks every week or month or so. But a primary place of residence doesn't actually pay you anything to hold it. Another class of investment shouldn't have any holding costs that outweigh the potential appreciation of the capital of that investment. So for example, you might buy gold, which doesn't actually pay you anything to hold gold, but the holding costs are low enough that if you hold it over a certain span of time, it should increase in value enough to outweigh that. With real estate, you can't always guarantee that effect. So that's the one reason, is cash flow. Obviously you're going to be paying property taxes, rates and fees, and not to mention the cost of maintenance and your actual mortgage as well if you have one. So really a primary place of residence is just going to be sucking money out of your pocket every single month, which is not really what a good investment would do. So the second reason I think is very important in relation to why your home isn't actually an investment is intention. And the reason I think intention is very important is because when you go to buy an investment property, your intention for that is that it's going to basically be a vehicle to get you from financial point A to point B. So your mind frame going into that is really going to be heavily based on numbers, statistics around the area, the growth the area has had, the demographic in the area. It's going to be heavily focused on metrics that can hopefully articulate why that's a good investment moving forward. And your emotions you need to really check at the door before you even start looking for investment properties, because if you're going to get torn up about how cute the house looks or how nice the street is in relation to where you live currently, or you don't like the color of something about the house, or you think it could be a bit nicer with some landscaping done, and blah blah blah. Look, you're going to be looking at it in terms of where you want to live, which is highly different to a good investment in most cases. So the important thing is to have that separation of intention. So when you're buying somewhere to live, look, if you have the money and you're fortunate enough to be able to do that for yourself, by all means, be emotional about it. Pick the one with the nice fence you like. Budget for some renovations or something like that. But when it's an investment, if it is an investment and you actually want it to perform, you need to be looking at the financials more than anything. Obviously, I wouldn't suggest buying a shed because it's cheap or because it'll have a higher rent yield than the mortgage payments or something. Although those are good things, but there's a factor of things you need to take into consideration: condition, location, demographics. What's happening in the area, what development's happening, does the actual property cash flow as well, so that you could keep it in tough times. Those are all important things to consider moving forward, but the intention needs to be clear. The third reason why I believe that property is not always an investment is appreciation is a benefit but not a guarantee. So a lot of people buy real estate with the assumption that it will go up in value, and historically that has generally been the case when you look at it over a decent span of time, say 20 years. But I mean, you've seen in the US, such as with the global financial crisis in 08-09, like, property doesn't always go up, and in the short term anything can really happen. And that's no different to Australia, where I live as well. The last 2 or 3 years we've had a property downturn. Things are starting to pick back up now, but I mean, if you bought it 2016, 2017 thinking that you could make a quick buck, sell that 2 years later, you'd be wrong. You'd be selling for less than you bought 2 years ago now. So I mean, it's always important, I think, to buy property with a long-term mindset. I would never buy a property with the intention of selling it in at least 15 years. Preferably never to sell. That's just my preference. But if you had to, that would be my preference to say. So never buy something with the assumption that you're banking on that capital increase. So if you buy a principal place of residence, you're not getting any rent. You're not getting any tax benefits because it's not going to be taxed as an investment. So really all you're hoping for is that capital appreciation, which may not come. And if it does come, it's important to note that because of inflation, if you need to work out how much it's actually increased in value versus how much it's increased in price, you might find it's actually underperformed compared to some other investments. Even putting your money in the stock market, or maybe even a good high interest savings account for that time, might have yielded a slightly better result. Of course, you have the experience and the benefit of owning property, and there's always the potential it could have increased significantly in that time, but it's just not guaranteed. So that's why I think that saying the blanket statement of your home is an investment is just not true. There's too many variables and there's too many things that can go wrong, and it just doesn't really line up as an investment for me personally, and I hope you understand now why. Point number 2, you have time to invest later. I have to tell you guys, you do not. This is something I really commonly heard through later years of high school, university, now even early in the workforce. People, especially in their early 20s, late teens, think they have all the time in the world to invest. They see their parents in their 50s and 60s. They know that their parents have good superannuation retirement funds. They might have a couple of $100,000 in stocks or in some investment properties. Their parents might have indicated or led them to believe that they didn't start putting those things in motion until later in life, and maybe that's the case, and maybe they've done okay, but past performance doesn't dictate future returns. We've had a great run in property and stock prices over the last 20 years, give or take, in Australia anyway. So I mean, that's certainly plumped up a bit of a generational divide in wealth, but for people sort of my age in their early mid-20s or younger, and even really people under 30 or 35 even, it's critical that you start as soon as possible investing, because looking at how the financial landscape is looking now, it's probably going to be a case of high capital but low yields is what you really need moving forward over the next 10 years or so. It's unlikely we're going to see crazy 10-15% jumps in property prices or insane stock yields over the next 10 years. It just doesn't really lend itself to believe that can continue sustainably. So I think moving forward, having large amounts of capital invested is actually what's going to be able to catapult people ahead until we kind of have a bit of breathing room that prices can increase more drastically again. The other reason why you don't have time to invest later really is because of compound interest, and compound interest is one of those magical beasts that I think Warren Buffett defined it as the 8th wonder of the world or something like that. But basically, through compound interest, money you invest now over a longer period of time will start to increase in return exponentially. So I'll show a little graphic on the screen now just to kind of visualize. If you're not familiar with compound interest, I highly recommend looking it up, playing with some online calculators that, even just some basic saving or share return calculators. They kind of all get the same principle going for you, just to visualize that, a compounded interest rate over time, it might start very small, but towards those latter years, it'll just become increasingly more and more powerful. So, investing 3 years earlier now might not seem like a big difference, in the first couple of years, but that extra bit of money churning away for you over those first few years is going to make a big difference in the latter half. When you're in your late 50s, early 60s, late 60s, that could be the difference of hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially working for you that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think it's very important to prioritize investing and your financial future moving forward, even from a young age. So the third common financial money myth, and this is one that I struggled with quite a lot actually several years ago, is that buying is always better than renting. I think anyone that's kind of financially savvy sort of looks at renting as a bit of a way of throwing away money. Whilst there is some truth to that, I don't think that can be a blanket rule. I think it has to be a bit more circumstantial than that. If you're in the position where, say, you want to live somewhere quite expensive, like if you wanted to live in or around Sydney CBD, for example, because you work there, if you wanted to buy a house, it would cost you millions. If you wanted to buy a 2-bedroom unit, it would probably still cost you $1.5 million for something nice. That's a lot of money, and that's going to be a big drain on your finances. It makes a lot more sense for most of us to invest somewhere where it's a good investment, where property is cheaper, where there's still growth to be had. Whereas if you want to buy somewhere that you might actually want to live, given your circumstances, it could make more sense to rent, because the rent will be a lot cheaper. So not that I would advocate renting just for fun, but there are circumstances where renting can make more sense over buying, or maybe buying where someone else is going to live and pay you rent, and renting from someone else in the area that's more desirable to you. It's really about weighing up the financials and how much money you're making, how long you plan to stay in the area, whether or not it makes sense to, say, buy elsewhere and rent where you want to live for a while. There's a lot of benefits to this. Tax benefits in some respects for having somewhere rented out as well. But yeah, I wouldn't say a blanket rule of buying is always better than renting, because there are circumstances where that cannot be the case. Another benefit of that, I suppose, is if you're trying to move to a new area and you're not sure if you want to commit to it yet, it's very important that you don't overcommit or over leverage yourself into an area. Say you want to move to a new town or a new state or a new city. I think buying off the bat is a poor move, and I think that's pretty obvious. But you know, spending a year renting or even moving around a little bit just to see what specific pocket of that area you like, or whether you even like it at all, is very important before you actually commit to buying property there, because property has a lot of costs in entering and exiting. So really the long-term play is what you need for property, and if you're not sure about an area long-term for yourself, you should be a little bit more hesitant about buying in the first place. So the fourth and final money myth I want to talk about today is that I can't afford to save. This is something that I hear from a lot of my friends, actually. And I mean, I have to admit, there is some truth to it. I can understand it. I've felt that way myself in the past, but I've read a lot of books around, you know, finance, saving, investing, and the common trend is that you have to pay yourself first. I know you've heard it before. It's a really common saying, but there is so much truth to it, and this is why I think so. I think if you say you get paid $1,000 a week, if you take that $1,000 a week into your bank account and you just let it sit there, and you sort of think to yourself, all right, I'll see how much money I can keep there by the end of the week, and then whatever's left, then I'll invest or save that somewhere else that I'm not going to be able to touch. I think there's a lot of problems with that. As humans, we're kind of wired to use up all the time or use up all the money we have available when we know we have that available. If someone gives you a deadline for something in 2 weeks, you're going to be doing it the night before, right? It's kind of the same with your money. If you leave yourself that $1,000 in your bank account, you're probably going to spend most, if not all of it. Even though you might think you're struggling, if you go back and look through all your transactions, you know, what did you buy for lunch? Could you have made that at home a couple of days that week? How much are you spending on petrol? Maybe you need a more efficient car, or maybe you could have called the bus, who knows? There is going to be some compromise there most likely, or you might take a slight drop in your comfort or living standards, but that will be worth it for you long term potentially. So I think the important thing to do is to pay yourself first, and by that I mean as soon as you receive that money, take whatever the percentage allocation of that away you want to invest, and just invest it straight away, or put it into that other savings account straight away, and then don't touch it. You should have an emergency fund as well that you should be topping up for emergencies, so you don't have to eat into your savings or investments, but that's sort of a separate point of discussion. But to keep it simple for this video, if you are getting that $1,000 in every week, let's say you want to try and save 20%, I would take $200 out straight away. You can even automate it so you don't even have to think about it or see it or touch it. Go put that in your other savings account. When you have enough there to invest, go and buy your stocks, buy your real estate, whatever you want to do. But then you can live off that 800. And if you find you can't, well, look, you can still access the money if it's an absolute emergency, or better than that, you should have your emergency fund that you can tap into for bigger emergencies, like if your car breaks down, or if you get kicked out and you need to find a new place to live really quickly. That's what the emergency fund's for. You should really never be touching your investments or savings, but I challenge you to try that. For 2020 even, I challenge you January, next time you get paid, to pull out some money that you want to try and save, and see how you go living off the rest. Challenge yourself, make it like a bit of a video game sort of thing. Survive till the end, if that makes sense to you. This is something I tried a couple of years ago when I was still in university. I wasn't earning the most money back then. I was still working, 2 jobs and all that, but really, when you're that young, you're not earning big money. So it is a challenge when you have, a car with, got to pay petrol, insurance, you got to pay, all these other things that come through. You have to live, you have to get a gym membership if you want to go to the gym, blah blah blah. Some people have different priorities, but yeah, I think it's very important that you prioritize saving and that you do it ahead of time, so that you actually have, for one, that buffer in place, and number 2, that psychological checkmate on yourself, that you can actually do this and you have something to commit to, so that you don't have that safety net just sitting there in your checking account. And one more thing I forgot to mention, I have a blog article around this topic linked below. just goes into a little bit more detail about the points that I've discussed as well. You might want to check it out. So I'd like to personally thank you guys for watching today's video. This is my first video that I'm putting out on this channel. I hope to be putting out 2 to 3 videos per week moving forward. They're all going to be about money, investing, finance, entrepreneurship, all that kind of stuff. I'm really passionate about it. So if you're interested in those topics and you want to learn and follow me on my own journey, please consider subscribing and like the video if you enjoyed the video and these myths. Let me know in the comments if you agree or if you disagree with some of my points around those myths. I'm sure they're a bit contentious in some ways. You know, different people have different opinions, but I think the important thing that I want to stress is, whilst I said these are myths, it's not that they can't be true circumstantially for some people, it's just that I don't think that they can be a blanket rule. I don't think you should tell everyone that their home is an investment. I don't think you should tell everyone that they can't afford to save, blah blah blah. So I just want to get that point around, that people need to think a little bit more critically about their own financial situation and see how they can better themselves compared to how they were yesterday or the week before or the month before. You're only competing with yourself in the financial game, really. So anything you can do to give yourself an advantage mentally or physically or anything like that, I think it's worth exploring. So I just wanted to share those with you guys. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.